Chapter 7. Mathias crammed his soggy clothes into the washing machine. The deserted laundry room allowed him the freedom to curse Gomez and Walker, Waterman, and Andrew in equal proportions. He tossed Andrew's t-shirt in and lifted the khakis, then paused. They were heavier than they should be. Right, his badge. He yanked out the wallet. An avalanche of debris followed, scattering across the cheap linoleum. Mathias growled and bent to pick up the mess. A dozen Starburst wrappers, a post-it note with 4524 Cherry Street scrawled on it, and 18 cents in change. He pocketed the coins, tossed the wrappers in the trash, and debated the note. Andrew might want it back. He added it to his pocket, started the washing machine, and charged up the basement stairs. Jerome's house was situated in a suburb about 3 miles from Mathias's apartment. Except for small details like paint and landscaping, each house on the street looked like the one beside it. It was the perfect place to blend in, if you didn't mind losing your identity. The swarm of police cars stripped away the anonymity from Jerome's 2-story canary yellow house. Flashing red and blue lights guided Mathias to an empty space at the curb. He grabbed his camera and a handful of nitrile gloves, then locked his truck. Curious neighbors peeked through their blinds, ducking when he glanced in their direction. This was a poor neighborhood. The residents were cautious of crime scenes. Every window of Jerome's house blazed in the deepening twilight. The officer stationed at the front door glanced at Mathias's badge and nodded him through. Mathias snagged a pair of shoe covers from the box inside the door to slip over his tennis shoes. Blue-gloved policemen wandered the living room, inspecting furnishings and collecting items into plastic bags. Mathias cringed. With the haphazard way the general police force labeled evidence, this would be a nightmare to sort out. From the far side of the room, Gomez waved to Mathias. He held his phone to his ear with the other hand.
No sign of him. Neighbors haven't seen him or his car since yesterday. I'll let you know as soon as we find anything.
At Mathias's approach, he hung up the phone and motioned to the console table beside him. The drawer hung open, and a couple dozen business cards had been laid out on the table.
What do you make of these?
Mathias stretched a pair of gloves over his hands. Using the eraser of a pencil, he separated the cards. One by one, he picked up the cards with a pair of tweezers. The company names sound familiar. They were in the brief on Waterman's holdings. Gomez shoved the cards with his finger.
A few aren't, but most of them are businesses her corporation controls around Felmond.
Mathias glared at Gomez. The man refused to learn proper evidence handling techniques. His careless shuffling of the cards had probably smeared any fingerprints. Mathias sighed, pocketed the tweezers, and gave the detective his full attention. Well, most of his attention. The demon was bored and hungry. Union contacts? I bet Jerome was tight with some of the employees.
That's my guess.
Gomez scratched his cheek and folded his thick arms over his chest.
The kidnapping has been too organized for a lone perp to pull off. He's got to be working with at least one accomplice. I'm laying odds someone in this pile knows what's going on.
It made sense. The cards represented a lot of legwork, though. He'd never get to the girl in time if he had to check each business. He needed more to go on.
Oi! New girl. Atuan.
Gomez snapped his fingers.
Come back and tag these cards.
I can take care of them. Mathias reached for an evidence bag. If he logged them into evidence, he'd get first crack at them. Hunger burned through his veins and the demon rumbled. He had to beat the cops to the kidnapper. An intoxicating scent slapped him across the face, rocking his head back. The raven-haired woman from the lab nudged her way between Gomez and Mathias. The demon lunged for her. Mathias jerked away, lost his balance, and sprawled onto the hardwood floor. Sue reached for him, eyes wide.
Are you okay?
Gomez stepped around her, laughing.
Rough day, Hawthorne. Maybe you should try sleeping once in a while.
Mathias pushed himself onto his elbow. Working with Sue was his worst nightmare. She bent over him, a concerned look on her face. He scooted away from her. His fangs threatened to descend, and he turned his head. I'm fine. Please, just give me... A dark smudge, partly hidden beneath the corner of a rug in the tiled entryway, caught his eye. He rolled to his knees. Anything to take his mind off her. Gomez crouched next to him.
What is it?
Mathias lifted the rug to expose a brown smear. It's mud. Did your guys do this?
Of course not.
Gomez scowled, gesturing at the covered shoes surrounding them.
Nobody's dumb enough to break protocol on this one.
Good. Mathias laid a black and white evidence ruler next to the mud and snapped some pictures. It isn't dry yet, so it's recent. I'll get it back to the lab. He scraped the mud into a specimen container. Gomez grabbed Mathias's arm, making him tense.
You need to be done.
The detective spoke in a low tone.
Finish taking pictures, then go home and get some rest.
Mathias opened his mouth to speak, but Gomez overrode him.
We're under a microscope on this one. You're obviously tired and making mistakes. Go home, Matt.
He took the specimen container from Mathias, stood upright, and handed it to Sue.
Take the evidence to the lab for analysis.
He raised his voice.
Give anything else you find to Atwan. The lab techs are pulling an all-nighter. Those of you with things to do, finish up. Everyone else get some sleep and be back at 6 tomorrow morning to be briefed on their findings.
A chorus of mutters swept the room. Mathias stood and rubbed his burning eyes beneath his sunglasses. Sue's scent pervaded the room, making his throat itch. If he had to take pictures, he might as well start as far from her as possible. The demon disagreed, clawing and scratching as Mathias walked away. He headed up the stairs, following an officer's directions to what he presumed was Jerome's bedroom. Drawers hung empty. Hangers lay on the floor of the open closet. Someone had left in a hurry. The officers hadn't tagged anything of interest, so he snapped photos of the general disarray. It would be impossible to determine everything that was missing, but perhaps he could spot something useful when his mind cleared. Sue's aroma hung in his nostrils even up here.
I'm sorry I startled you.
Mathias spun, heart pounding. Sue stood in the doorway, a half smile on her face.
You're a little on edge, aren't you?
Mathias pressed his lips together, battling twin urges to attack her or run from the house. I'm tired. She surveyed the room.
Mark Jerome is insane if he thinks he'll get away with kidnapping Jessica Waterman's kid. Prison is the least of his worries.
The backs of Mathias's legs hit the bed, and he realized he'd been retreating. How do you mean? Sue lifted a shoulder.
Waterman doesn't like to be threatened or told what to do. I doubt Jerome will live long enough to regret his choices, if he's still alive now.
He stiffened. Are you saying Waterman has people killed? She gave him a bland look.
I would never say that, but her enemies tend to turn up missing, or have attacks of conscience and commit suicide.
Someone from downstairs called her name. She glanced over her shoulder.
I have to get going, but I was wondering, do you want to get coffee sometime?
Her cheeks pinked, and the sweet smell of her blood intensified. Mouth dry, Mathias swallowed against the fiery prickle in the back of his throat. The demon couldn't care less about coffee, but it liked her suggestion. I don't think that would be a good idea. It was a horrendous idea. The image of Victoria sprawled in his arms, throat torn out, flashed before his eyes. A frown flitted across Sue's face.
Oh, do you have a girlfriend?
A girl? No, I'm not dating anyone. Ever. She tilted her head, brows furrowed and mouth puckered to one side. He took a deep breath. I don't date co-workers. It isn't a good idea to mix business with pleasure. A smile crept onto her lips. She stepped into the room and placed a light hand on his forearm.
Then I'll have to change your mind.
She winked and glided away, hips swaying. He squeezed his eyes shut and pinched the bridge of his nose. That had been too close. His arm stung where she'd touched him and his body thrummed. No way would he be able to sleep tonight. The business cards. If he could get a hold of them, he could hunt. He needed to hunt. Mathias dove out of the room and jerked to a halt at the top of the stairs. The front door swung shut on Sue, carrying a large box full of evidence bags. He'd missed his chance at the cards. He slammed a fist against the banister. The two remaining officers in the foyer whirled, eyes wide. Jaw set, he glowered at the officers, who glanced at each other and turned away from him. He stalked back to Jerome's bedroom and lifted his camera. Tomorrow, then. He would get his hands on the cards, and he would make the kidnapper regret ever touching that innocent girl.